let me explain my church context a little bit, but not to say I'm an expert on this. Okay, I want to clarify that I'm not an expert, but I think I've at least got the credibility to speak about it. Okay, so we've been in full-time ministry for almost 20 years, working with a variety of organizations, OM, and I teach at Union, and run Cor Deo. So all the things that are in the bio, you can see all that stuff. 10 years ago, we ended up starting a church. We didn't anticipate that. That was never part of my plan. I never thought I'd be a church planter. I don't even think I am a church planter. I just accidentally planted once. And that might be it. If I stay at that church for the rest of my life, I'm looking forward to it. That's totally fine. You know, so I'm not kind of one of these passionate church growth experts, okay? But I am in a church that currently is growing. But even though I say that, I don't want to give the impression that, great, we've got some answers from a church that's growing. Because actually, from the perspective of leadership, one of the biggest frustrations is guests that don't return. You know, people come and you think, and then they don't come back. And that's really what we're talking about. So if I'm an expert in anything, on this subject, it's an expert in experiencing that frustration, because far more people don't come back than do come back. And so maybe what I have to share can be helpful in terms of thinking maybe from a different angle. Is there something that we can change? Is there something we can do so that maybe a few more don't not come back? That's the most confusing sentence of the day. You're welcome. You can write that down. So is there little tweaks we can make? And I'm talking about little tweaks. And so let me give you an opening illustration. Just a different subject. If we were going to talk about health, right, we would probably need to talk about the big stuff before we talk about the small stuff. All right, so you know, if we were going to do a seminar on health, we would want to talk about diet. That's the biggest thing, right? What we're eating and you know, how often and how much. We need to talk about exercise. We'd need to talk about sleep. We'd need to talk about stress. We should probably talk about smoking. You know, those are the big things that are important to have in place before we start talking about vitamins and supplements, right? The way that vitamins are advertised, it's like this is the secret to health, right? But the reality is you can take vitamins all day long. It's not going to help you if these things are not in place. And this subject that we're looking at is kind of similar. Some of the things we'll talk about might feel a little bit like vitamins. Well, that's a good thought. But I want to make sure that we're clear that there's a foundationally important thing that needs to be in place first. All right, or even several things. It's kind of like the diet, the exercise, the sleep. If those things aren't in place, tweaking some of the things that I mentioned isn't going to help. Okay, so what are those fundamental things? It's things like the gospel, right? Knowing what the gospel is and communicating it as well as possible. The role of the Bible, the place of Jesus, the fact that as a church leadership and core group, you love Jesus. If those things aren't in place, don't worry about some of these other things. Fix that. And honestly, if those things aren't in place, maybe we don't want guests to return to your church anyway, right? Because I've got no desire for churches to grow where Jesus isn't the focus and people don't end up loving him. That's not helpful, okay? We're not here to try to build the Protestant movement or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's nice. But it's nice if people go to exercise facilities, and it's nice if people join, you know, local community groups to pick up litter. That's not what I care about. What I care about is people knowing and loving Jesus. And so if that's not possible in your church, please, please, please fix that. Okay? But what I don't want you to do is go away from this and say, oh, Peter's one of those people that, you know, is all about making church really nice and, you know, comfortable, and he doesn't understand the gospel. No, I think I do, but I'm just trying to make a big fuss about that in the introduction, and I'll finish with that as well. But I want you to know I'm not kind of saying these are all fundamentally critical. Some of these are a bit like vitamin type things. We all okay with that? Okay, they're not going to get tweeted into Heresyville. Okay, so first reason why some guests do not return to your church is because it is not the church for them, and it's okay. Right? We've got to kind of realize that not every new face that walks through the door should end up being a part of your church community. For example, they could be visiting the area, and it's really nice that they came, they heard about your church, they know someone in it, they're a relative of somebody, they're there for the day, they're thankful, you're glad to meet them. It's fine, you're not going to see them again. Don't worry about it. That's not a problem. They're not going to move. If they live 8 hours away and they've both got jobs, even if you give them a great experience, they're probably not going to move to be part of your church. That's fine. Okay, don't feel guilty about that. Then you also get people that come to visit a church who are Christians. There's two groups. Christians considering their options. Now, I know I'm in the English context where there's a lot more churches probably than in some of your contexts. But even if you've only got 3 churches within driving distance, sometimes Christians have to consider whether they maybe need to be in a different church. Maybe something's happened, maybe it's not always bad. It could be healthy Christians considering their options. They've moved into the area, they're looking, they like your church, but they see that God's calling them to serve another church. Praise the Lord. They don't have to come to yours, Or maybe they've had a death in the family and going to their old church is just too painful and they need to start somewhere else. Great. It would be lovely if this was a good church for them. So there could be very healthy reasons for Christians to move churches. There can also be unhealthy Christians that are considering their options, and actually you might not want them to be in your church. All right? There are some people that have a track record, if you know it, of causing trouble everywhere they go. Now, I don't think that you should try to create a test so that you can, give them an exam and see if they're one of those so that you can show them out. That's not the way church life works. But my hope would be, certainly in our church, that they would sense that this church is healthy and they won't thrive. Do you know what I mean? Like if people are gossips, if people are power hungry, if people are kind of destructive, and these people totally exist in church world, I think if your church is healthy, as best as it can be, they can sort of sense, I'm not going to get anywhere here. A couple of conversations, few interactions. It's almost like, I don't want to overstate it, but it's almost like Judas Iscariot in the upper room. When Judas lasted maybe 3 years in the crowd of disciples, but you think about that upper room, Jesus getting down on his hands and knees, washing the disciples' feet, talking about, everything that's talked about in that 13th chapter. It's like amazing for us who have the Holy Spirit in us to read that. For Judas, that must have felt like, I can't breathe. Like I'm choking in this environment, And I kind of pray that our church will be healthy enough to choke out people that actually are just dangerous, that just want to kind of come in and do damage and whatever they think their motives are. So not every guest should return. Is that fair? Maybe you've experienced that actually there are some awkward people. We had a couple come to our church really early on, and I think it was like the second week. And I don't know how they found us, but they came and sat separately, and I chatted to them, and they were a bit, awkward. Not because they were new to church. If they were new to church, I'd be doing everything I can to help them feel at home. But they'd been going to church for years, and they'd never quite found a church that they were quite happy with, and they were kind of awkward in that sense. They came the second week, spoke to my colleague who was on the leadership team, and they started talking about how the word Trinity is not in the Bible. So this concept of the Trinity is, and I think his words to them were something like, I don't think you're going to really appreciate what we're doing here. Our church is called Trinity. Like we're not hiding it. I don't think you're going to appreciate this. Because we could just tell they were trouble. probably not saved, and we wanted to be gracious, but you've got to beware. It's not as simple as many as possible makes it as good as possible. So that's the first thing. Some guests don't return, and that's okay. All right, number two, second reason why they may not return, and this is something to be much more alert to, because it is not a friendly church. It's not friendly. They don't feel welcomed. Now, that's a really hard thing to evaluate. When you're in a church, it's friendly to you, right? Normally speaking, like you walk into church, people know who you are. They say your name. Hopefully they smile at you. Maybe, you even get hugs, who knows? But that doesn't mean that it's a friendly church to an outsider. You can have a church this size, where we all knew each other, we all speak to each other. One other person walks in and we go, and it's awkward. It's not a friendly church, but if you're sat in here and it's your best friends around you, to you it feels like a friendly church. Now, let's step back slightly from the idea that, hang on, this is superficial. What matters is Jesus proclaiming the truth, the gospel. Yes, it does. But Jesus was the friend of sinners. Right? Jesus didn't go around putting people off having a conversation with him who needed him and were open to it. You know what I mean? There's something theological about being friendly. It's not something fake. It's not something superficial. It goes to the heart of what Christianity is because it comes from the heart of who God is. If God wasn't Trinity, if God wasn't at his core relational, then everything relational about Christianity would be an add-on. It would be a pragmatic idea that maybe is helpful. But if God is Trinity, Father, Son, Spirit, in relationship, if there is a relationship at the core of everything, then we, his people, should be, of all people, the most genuinely relational, right? And so we want our church to be a friendly environment. You're not going to notice it yourself, but you need to deliberately evaluate. So how do you do that? I think by observation and by feedback. Maybe take a step back sometime if your church is big enough that you're not the only person that welcomes people. If it's possible that, there's the door, people are coming in. I'm just going to be aware. Does a stranger come in and look around and feel awkward? Or are they warmly welcomed? And then are they left, or then they introduced to somebody else? Is somebody offering to sit with them? So kind of, does it seem like it's working? You can watch it yourself. That's a good idea. You can also ask people. Ask somebody who's really new to the church. How was it when you first came? Did it feel friendly? Is there anything we could have done better? Or if you have a relative coming to visit and you trust them, not trust them, what's the word? And it's the kind of person that this isn't going to be bad for them. They trust you. You could say to them, hey, instead of walking in with me, would you mind walking in separately? Because I want to know if my church welcomes you appropriately. Some people I wouldn't subject that to, but some people, they would do that and it would be totally fine. And then afterwards they could say, well, yeah, it was great, except I didn't know where the front door was. Some your building, I don't. Some are really obvious, like it's a church, there's the door. But some churches are kind of round the back, in a business district or whatever. And is it signposted? Do they know? Are they confused? You know where it is, so you don't look for signs. But somebody who's coming, who knows it's in this area, can they find it? Can they find the entrance? Can they find where their kids are supposed to be? Can they find a seat? Some of those kind of things, but in the context of friendliness. It's really sad when you hear that someone visited a church, left a church, and no one spoke to them. When it goes wrong, that's when you realize, hang on a minute, this matters. This is really important. But we also need to beware of awkward friendliness. Friendliness that is like over the top. If I don't know about your culture specifically, but I suspect if you're European, you probably don't appreciate walking into a place and being greeted with a massive, loud, hug and drawing attention and flowers around your neck and, lights start flashing and, there's like, newcomer. Like, that's not friendly. What Lars did this morning, totally appropriate at a Christian conference. People from the majority world stand up, we want to appreciate. Don't do that to guests. This is your first Sunday, stand on your chair, we're going to sing a welcome song. That's not friendly, that's weird. All right? If you wouldn't want your next door neighbor to experience it, don't make somebody else experience it. So friendly but genuine. The third reason that guests do not return is because it is a mysterious church. It feels mysterious to them. Now, we've probably got a whole variety of denominations, a whole variety of styles. You may be in a church that meets in an ancient cathedral. That's very different from probably the rest of us in the room who do not meet in an ancient cathedral. And so, that will bring a certain tone to the way church is done. I still think it could be friendly, by the way. But what about the mysteriousness of it? We can think that because you're meeting in a building that's kind of blocky and normal instead of a traditional church, it's going to feel normal. Everything we do is not normal. It's weird. When I was at seminary, I had a class with a guy who, first week, he said, okay, I've got an assignment for you. There was, I think, 7 of us in this class. He said, this week, you've got to find a religious service and go to it. I was like, what? Religious service? He said, it cannot be Christian. You've got to find another religion, and we're going to determine which one, so you all go to a different one. Don't want you working together on this, but you've got to find out where they are, when they are, go to the service, see how it is, experience it. And I did a thing that I sometimes do in restaurants. And some of you are like me. You look at a menu and you go, I'm not sure. And because I did that, several other people picked all the obvious ones. I'll do JWs, I'll do Mormons, I'll do the mosque, whatever. And I was like, what's left? I sort of ran out of options. And the guy said, hang on, no one said Buddhist. Do Buddhist. I was like, okay, Buddhist. A Buddhist what? So I had to look it up. In those days, it was look it up, not look it up. And okay, found it, Buddhist temple, here's the address. When's there a service? Do they have a service? I've got no idea. I was really confused. So I drove over to the Buddhist temple, looked at all the signs, tried to read them and make sense of them. I can't make sense of this. I'm going to have to go in. And there was something that was stopping me because I'm a Christian, and my background, my upbringing, everything was like, this is weird. Okay, I went in and then this monk approached me and said, can I help you? And I said, well, yeah, I'm just trying to, I've never been here before. I'm just trying to find out, do you have a meeting or does something? He said, no, not really. Let me show you around. And he took me around and showed me the stuff. I don't really know what was going on. And then off to the side, and there was some food there. Would you like some food? And I chose not to, and because it was in front of an idol. My Bible was kicking in. But I had a friendly chat with him, and it was weird, and it was awkward, and I had no clue what I was doing. Actually, he was great, and he helped me. And then when I felt like I'd done enough to pass my assignment, I kind of left. And then we came back the next week, and we talked through all 7. It was really interesting to hear we all felt the same. You go to a Mormon church and you go to this part, and then did you try to go to the second service? Yeah, I tried, but they turned me away. I knew they would do that. The teacher knew what was coming because they're always predictable, but we had no idea. Did you know where to go, what to wear? I had no idea. I had no clue. I felt really awkward. What about crossing the threshold? That was strange, And then at the end of it, he said, okay, now you guys know what it's like to come to church for someone that's never been to church. It's that weird. And I remember thinking that through and thinking, you know what? It is. That feeling of I don't go into Buddhist temples because I'm a Christian as kind of holding me back. There's probably a lot of people that think, I don't go to church because I'm an atheist. Or my father was a strong atheist. I've never even, but now, what am I doing? It doesn't matter if it's a church building or a school hall. It's not easy, And so those little things that we've totally got no awareness of, because for some of us, going to church on a Sunday, we've been doing it since before we could talk. It's the most normal thing in the world, but it's not for them. Okay, so how can we take away the mystery? Because it would be a shame, wouldn't it, if people almost came to church or came to church and then left and never came back. And the reason was not because they evaluated the claims of Christ on their life and decided that actually they would rather take their chances instead of accepting the grace of a loving God. But the reason they went away was because I didn't know what was going on and everyone stood up and I was confused and poof, I'm not going there again. To me, that's just a very sad reason to miss out on the gospel, you know? And so what can you do? Well, you can recognize things that are awkward and difficult, and you can communicate what's going on. You can explain, or you can get rid of them. Okay, so for example, in our church, we always explain at the start of the service what is going to happen. And we were explaining what is going to happen when there was only 20 people in the room, and it was the same 20, and we were the people starting the church. And I remember when I was saying it, people looking around and seeing if there was a guest. And I was like, no, that's good. I want them to hear this because I've got to win their trust that if they bring a guest, they're going to be safe. They're going to know what's going on. And so, you know, some churches, it's very mysterious. Music starts, you know, and you know, the introduction, and then everyone stands up together. How did they know to do that? You know, and then at the end of it, everyone sits down, apart from at the end of one of the hymns when everyone stays standing and says some words. Where did they get those words from? You know, there's all these rituals that we have, you know, and the preachers say, you know, turn to whatever, and everyone's there. How did you find that? Never held a Bible before, and you just found 2 Chronicles 7:1? What does that mean? You know, so give them a page number, and give them the page number even first, because the Christians get to references really quick. You know, that doesn't really matter. But, you know, you want to kind of make sure that people have a chance to know what's going on. Worship leader, say, I'm going to play the introduction. Let's stand up together at the end of that instead of mystery. You know, just little things. Because for the person who feels new and awkward, they think everybody's watching them. You know, and it's like, I got that wrong. It's the worst thing. You know, we've had situations where somebody stood up and nobody else has. I'm like, please, come on, people, stand up with them. You know, and you see it sometimes. Someone stands up way too early and the person next to them goes straight up. Yes, that's loving. Because that's awkward, you know. And so little things that seem like nothing to us Christians can be utterly and totally embarrassing to a guest. Not knowing when the service is going to end. You know, we try to give a sense of there's this, and we're going to take about this long. And, you know, we try to give people a sense of what's happening, take away the mystery of it, help them to understand things. Like, has it ever crossed your mind? I don't know if your church has drink available, like drinks and snacks or whatever, refreshments. Based on my experience of going to most countries that I've been to, you should, because your food's awesome. Okay, so it's kind of cultural, isn't it, to share food with people. Why not do that in church? In fact, if you do that in church already, do you do it before as well? Why not? You could. But here's a question. Do guests know that it's free? We know it's free. You know, we're not going to put prices on our snacks. But actually for a guest, I've taken someone in through the door, welcomed them. Hey, good to see you. First time here? Yeah, let me show you where we are. Walked in with them and said, okay, so we're going to sit over here, but there's drinks and snacks over here. You know, help yourself. And they hesitated and looked at me. I said, it's all free. Go, yeah, come on, let's go for it. Oh, great. And in their mind, they're thinking, I didn't bring money. It wouldn't have crossed my mind, but somehow I spotted it. You know, so just be aware through their eyes, what are they seeing? And it's hard to see that when you're an insider. I heard a guy, American pastor, talking about an old couch as an example, an old sofa, you know, a piece of furniture that he loved and his wife loved, and they had so much history, you know, they kind of nursed babies on that couch, and, you know, it was just like family history, part of the family. and didn't realize that from everybody else's perspective, when they walked in, it's like, oh, what is that? Just this really ugly, falling apart piece of furniture. But he said, I couldn't see it because I saw it as positive. But a first-timer would react to it. There's things in our churches that to us are normal. First-timer, oh, that's weird. Take some of the mystery out. Don't take the mystery of the gospel out in a positive sense, but take the sort of mysteriousness of a religious ritual that's unnecessary. It's the insider knowledge stuff. We're not the Freemasons. We're not trying to make it a secret. We're actually wanting people to meet Jesus. Now, ideally, they're meeting him out there in conversation with us and coming to church once they've already met him. I'm not saying the church is the environment where evangelism has to happen. Logically, it should happen with Christians sharing the gospel with friends, but in reality, people come to church who are not Christian and don't get it in many settings. Okay, so those are the people we're thinking about. Number 4, the fourth reason is that your church may be child unfriendly. It's very easy to think, here come 4 people, a family of 4, the adults are important. They're the decision makers. We want to make sure that they have a good experience. But the children don't. Well, then they're not coming back. Okay, in the notes I put the loudest quiet voices on the journey home. So the loudest quiet voices, this is almost like ancient Gnosticism, but the loudest quiet voices on the journey home are the concerned parents. If the mother felt like she didn't really know that her child was being taken care of in the children's thing that happened, and she felt awkward about it, like it didn't seem safe, or it didn't seem clean, or it didn't seem organized, or did they really know what they were doing, or there was 2 adults and one of them was on their phone when I dropped my child off. She's not going to be saying stuff in front of the kids. She'll be very quiet, but she's concerned. And that's going to be a reason they don't go back. Because it doesn't matter how amazing the service is and the music and the preaching, if my 3-year-old is not safe or happy, I'm not coming here again. And hopefully the dad would have the same mindset. It doesn't have to just be mothers that care, right? So the quiet voice in the car would be the parents who are concerned because it didn't feel good. Or there was no provision for the children and the children are in the service. I know that happens in some settings. But the way that the adults talked about the children was, dismissive, or they're a problem. Same kind of concern. So you see what I mean? If the parents don't feel like the children are having a good experience, they're going to be quiet, but they're going to be thinking, The loudest loud voices in the car on the way home are going to be the children, if they had a good time. All right, so we literally have people in our church because their children enjoyed our church. Just chatting with a friend the other day, and he said we went to 3 churches and told our kids, you choose. It's important for them to enjoy church, and they chose ours. Great. And they were children at that stage. That's reality. Whether your culture is child-driven and child-centered or not, technically speaking, usually if a child loves a church and they had a great time and they did a Bible story and they were really friendly and I made this new friend and her name is whatever, if your children are talking like that, as a parent, you think, let's go there again. Obviously if the rest of it's a disaster, you might not, but it's powerful. Whereas if you think, we had a good time. How did you think? Did you have a good time, kids? No, nobody spoke to us. I got punched. They ran out of food before I got to whatever. If they're negative, it's going to be a battle the next week to get them. So they're going to win in some form. They're going to influence. So think about your children's provision, whatever that is. Now, if you've got a church with 20 people and no children, maybe you need to think about what do we do if a guest has children? You might find that actually in our church, we've got 2 people that absolutely love children and can really win the trust of parents quickly. And if a guest comes with children, they know they're going to go and say, hey, do you want me to take your child and see if I can entertain them for a bit so that you can focus? Oh, Where? Well, just maybe over at the back, and they can see you, whatever, don't make it weird, like we take your child away. But, I'm offering, and it's just kind, it doesn't need a massive plan, but most churches have someone that could probably pull that off. If you have a bigger church or you have lots of children, then you've got to think things through much more. Is it safe? Is it clean? Is it organized? Is it, good quality? Even not just having good leadership and organization, but even having some key children trained to be friendly to the guest children, because some children have no clue, and some children are from families that are not anywhere near teaching them to be kind to other people. But there are some that can, and say, hey, how daddy is preaching and serving Jesus? Well, here's something you can do. I'm only 5. Yeah, you can be friendly if somebody comes in to say, hey, there's a new kid, make sure you sit with him and ask him his name. Ask him what he likes. Coach children, and they make friends, and, it's all part of the package. So children's ministry matters, not because they are a means to getting the adults, but because they are humans. And we want them to know Jesus. So it's not being tricky, it's being complete with a family. Let's move on to the next one. In the notes I used an awkward word actually. I said, 5th reason, it is environmentally unfriendly. I'm actually not talking about the environment. You can decide how much you recycle in your church and how much you want to buy into that agenda. But obviously be sensitive to the fact that people coming are overpowered by that agenda. Whether we agree with it or not, the media is pushing something. And so if we're overtly going in the opposite direction, we're creating unnecessary antagonism. So be environmental, okay. But what I mean here is, what's the actual environment like of the church? Again, it's very easy to look at a very wealthy American church and think, oh, what a dream. Okay, keep dreaming. But the reality of, the little building that you rent, you can't change it into a flowing green campus like a US university or something, but you can still improve it. You can still think it through from the perspective of a first-timer. And so what is it like for someone to arrive at your church? We talked about this in terms of friendliness, but logistics, visual impressions. Okay, so do they know how to find it? But even before that, if you have a website, what's your website like? Is that clear? Does that look like it was built in 2005 with moving GIF images? Stop it, make your website decent. I've lost track of the number of people that have come to our church because of our website. It's not that great, but it's good enough. So website, then does it have directions to find the building and where to park? And when you get there, do you know where to go? And when you get in, do you know where to go? Is it obvious where you're supposed to sit? Are you supposed to get refreshments? Some places, and it's not our fault because we're renting the only thing we can find, some places are like a maze, a mystery maze. And the problem is, for us as Christians, we've been there, even if we've been there 2 months, we seem like an expert. We know our way to everything. But for the first timer, where am I going? Before we started our church, we had a few weeks where we'd left our old church. We hadn't yet started our new church. We had a few weeks where we said, we're not yet a church. We're still praying about it. And if you don't have a church because of the circumstances that we left the church in, go to a church. And by the way, not only is that good because you should go to church on Sunday, but also watch and learn. And we compared notes. And I went to 6 churches and every one of them did something well. And we copied all of it. Because why not, right? I'll tell you, one of them, we arrived in the car park. The moment I thought, I'm not sure where to go, somebody approached us and welcomed us and told us where to go. They didn't tell me where to go. They, hey, first time here, good to meet you. Hey, we're down here, let me show you. And that was great. Came inside. First thing we saw was a table with a sign on it saying safeguarding officer. The person who's in charge of making sure children are safe. Big picture of their face. Positive, like a smiley face. It wasn't like, oh, but it was like, oh wow, they take children seriously. And then it came in, refreshments. Whoa. Like in England, I don't know what your country is used to. English churches traditionally, a plate of bad biscuits. Don't think American cookies, think bad biscuits. and you get a cup of tea because you don't want to eat that without dipping it in something. It's not the dream. I walked into this church, they had overflowing displays of croissant. It was like a French patisserie in there. And I remember thinking, wow. And I've not even spoken to anyone inside the building yet, but I've been impressed in the car park. I've taken note of the safeguarding and the refreshments, my word, hello. I like this place. I'm already feeling positive, and so why not? If our budget, if it costs €5 to just throw some biscuits on a plate, why not spend €20 and give them something that's worth eating? It's part of the experience, So the arrival, the entry, a sense of security. If there are teenagers outside making threatening noises, which we had at one point, have somebody who's good with teenagers go and talk to them, not threaten them. I've seen churches do that as well. That doesn't. We want people to come in here and meet Jesus. Get away. It's like, oh. So, some people cannot, and some Christians that are quite respected in the church cannot cope with the stress of a teenager that's a bit, strong. Don't let them deal with them. It's a bad scene to have a 50-year-old man losing his temper and starting to hit people, It doesn't reflect well on the gospel. So just, okay, thanks, sit down. We're going to let this guy do it. He's great with kids. There's going to be someone in your church that's better at that. And so do people feel safe, from what's going on around? Do they feel welcome? What's the seating like? This is way too full for a church. Some of you came in right at 4:15 and you're like, oh. Imagine going into a church for the first time and having to walk all the way to the front and sit right in front of a speaker. Oh my word. Guard some seats at the back. It doesn't matter if that seat has been sat in by that old woman for the last 417 years. Graciously invite her forward because, we need some seats at the back for guests, or latecomers. Now, equally, if a guest comes, don't force them into the back row. If they come early and there's lots of seats, hey, sit wherever you like. That's welcoming. But if someone comes in right at the time the service starts and there's no seats available that are easy to get to, that feels awkward. So seating, what's the situation there? The smell. I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to say it. As somebody who's visited churches, probably hundreds of churches as a guest speaker, some of them stink. Oh, not like a farm stink, although it depends where the baby changing facilities are. But some of them smell of old cleaning fluid. And if you've been in that church your whole life, that's a smell you're familiar with. But I get flashbacks in some churches. I walk into the church, and I don't comment, obviously, but inside I'm thinking, wow, I feel like I've just stepped back into 1982 to this other church that used to have the same cleaning fluid. Maybe this is the same batch that they're still using. Do you know what I mean? It seems silly, but just mention it in case, it's like if you've got bad body odor. It's really awkward, but it's really helpful if someone points it out to you at some point. So maybe your church smells, ask a guest. Temperature. If your church is consistently overpoweringly hot, so that everybody's sat there in a t-shirt and dripping, it's a bit awkward if guests come and they've got loads of clothes on. So I don't know how you deal with that. Fix the temperature, or at worst case, mention it on your website, or don't mention it. That'd be weird. but maybe put a picture. That would solve it. If people see a picture and they see that everybody's just wearing short sleeves, like Peter or like Mike or whatever, at least that you can't, it's a bit of a hint, isn't it? Or if your church is freezing cold because you're meeting in an ice cave or something, mention it, bring an extra layer. Our warmth is in friendliness, not in temperature. I don't know. Do what you can, right? So the environment matters, and you need to ask for feedback on that stuff, because I tell you, you're missing things in your church. I miss things in my church all the time because I'm there all the time. And so when you have people come to visit, ask them if they noticed anything. So you won't offend me. Is there anything about our church that felt weird or felt strange or felt off, anything at all? Well, yeah, it looked really messy in that corner. Oh, thanks. Oh my word, it is really messy in that corner. We were just throwing stuff there to store it. So get feedback, consider the environment of it. Number 6, it didn't make sense. Now, what I mean by that is kind of inconsistency. Earlier on, we thought about it was a mystery. Now, it could be very consistently a mystery, like I didn't have a clue what was happening at any point. That's what we've covered already. But it was inconsistent, like there was something that was jarring. That's a very English word, isn't it? So, you can have a whole load of things that fit in an environment, but one thing that's like, that was just, whoa, what was that? If there's something like that, if there's an inconsistency in your church, then maybe deal with it once you discover it. So for example, maybe you have a very modern building, a very warm and friendly style, very contemporary music, very contemporary style preaching, very contemporary dress sense, and a pipe organ. Now, I'm not against pipe organs, like they can sound amazing, but it doesn't fit with that style of church. You see what I mean? So if there's one thing that's off, and it could be something environmental like that, or it could be some element of the service. Maybe you have good music, good preacher, but the person who does the announcements just makes you feel awkward. Well, they've always done it. Maybe find a gracious way to help them find another area of ministry and ease someone. Sell them on the vision of inspiring a new generation of people who can also do notices at the beginning of a service. Actually, that welcoming role at the start is really important. Sets the tone for everything. We've got a team of welcomers, but basically we've got a star guy. And so we talk about, who should we have for this week? If it's a big event or a service we're expecting guests, it's always the same person we ask first. Why? Because he's so good at it. And if he's not available, or we've asked him every week for like 3 in a row, then it'll be one of the others of us. But we won't let it be any of these who aren't really suited to it. There's no benefit in somebody who feels really shy, really awkward, doesn't really like being up front. Well, come on, it'll be your way to serve the Lord. Well, actually, I would serve the Lord better if I didn't do it. So don't let him do it. Have somebody that is warm and sets the tone. It's those kind of roles that can end up being bizarrely different. I went to one church once. If I had time, I'd tell you the entire story, but it was like, I felt like I was in a movie. It was so many things that went wrong that day. I started to look around for a camera, it wasn't that one, but try to see, like, surely this isn't genuine. But in the midst of all this chaos of my church experience, there was the notices at the start of the service, and the guy said, welcome, and this is what we're going to do, and he kind of explained. I don't remember what the notices were, but then he said, because today is such and such a day in the American calendar, Americans like to celebrate certain dates. Usually their independence from us, but it was one of those kind of dates. It was Memorial Day, I think, in May. And he said, I want to quote a poem. And so he launched into this poem, but he couldn't remember it. And so after every line, he went, and then he said the next line. And I'm serious, it took about 5 minutes to get through a 10-line poem. And it was quite funny. I was trying desperately not to laugh. I was sitting on the front row thinking about all the sadness of, death in the world and relatives that I'm only going to see when I see Jesus. And, I was trying not to, because if I start giggling, I'm a guest preacher. But anyway, it was bad. It was really awkward. It was so awkward. The worship leader was having to evaluate which songs to lose. The worship leader then didn't lose any songs, so thankfully I'd evaluated how to reduce my message. My message went literally from 30 minutes down to 10. And it all started with that poem. And so it didn't matter if the message was good, or even if the music was good. That was just weird. It didn't work. So inconsistencies like that, if something doesn't quite fit, evaluate everything in a church. Now, the other thing is consistency with size. I mentioned this a bit before. If your church is a church of 2,000, people expect certain things. like organized car parking and nice facilities and good audio visuals, and presumably there's hundreds of people paid to do this thing. Most of us are not in that world. But in the European realm, there is small church that then transitions to big church. In England, they say under 100 adults is small, over 200 adults is big. And they say very few churches that grow past 100 make it past 200. They go over 100 and then they come down. They go over 100 and then they come down. Why? Because a larger church creates expectation for different things than a smaller church. In a small church, you can get away with someone who does that kind of notices. In a church of 20 or 30, it would have been great. In a church of 150, it wasn't great. You see what I mean? Oh, that's Dave, he always does that, or whatever, you know. You can get away with it because you're friendly, you know each other, you know, it's great. Music, not so great. Preaching, it's all right. But, you know, people will cope because it's friendly and loving in a small group. When you go to a bigger church, people expect what's up front to be of a certain standard. The music, the preaching, it's got to be good, bigger. And it's very hard to go from a church where the values were friendly to a church where the values are bigger. So you've got to evaluate not just is this consistent with itself, but also is this consistent with its size. Okay, there's more we could say about that, but let's get to the last one. Number 7. Seventh reason why people don't return to your church, and this is the one that I really wish I took all the time on, but that's what I do most years. The preaching. Preaching is a reason why people stay or go. Preaching does matter. Preaching is critical. And if the preaching doesn't connect, they're probably not going to want to come back. Presumably, preaching is quite a significant proportion of the service, hopefully. Right? If you value the Bible, hopefully it's not 6 minutes. But the preaching is significant in size, so it needs to work. It needs to feel relevant. It needs to connect with them. And people coming in who are not Christians, who don't know that this is normal, they're not used to somebody standing up and talking. It's weird. And they might go, what's going on? How long is this going to go on for? Oh my word, I'm so bored. Like there's a whole load of stuff that goes on in their minds. So people will join and people will leave because of the preaching of a church. When another church starts to tank and go into a really bad place, Christians will start looking for a church, and they're looking for somewhere to be fed. And if they come to your church and you haven't got everything else quite worked out, and if they haven't got children, but your preaching is decent, I felt like I was fed. Thank you, I'll be back. So the preaching is so significant. Okay, so quick things to be aware of. Some preaching is to something. If it's to something, then it's not helpful, right? So too lofty, too academic, too angry. Any of those things, you've got a problem. It's like, whoa, that felt far off from me. But equally, it can go the other direction, too flippant, too humorous, too desperate to sound relevant, too weak on the Bible. Any of those things, you've got a problem as well. So you've got to navigate that. What you're saying as a preacher has to connect with the listeners so they feel like it's part of something they need for life. But you've also got to be thoroughly connected with this so that they sense the authority of it. It's not just that you tell nice stories. So it's both Bible and life and forging that connection. And ultimately, I always think, okay, does the preaching point people to themselves or does it point them to Christ? That's really, for me, the ultimate simplistic evaluation. If preaching tells people to try harder and do better and fix themselves and turn over a new leaf and stop this and start that so that they go away feeling like they've been beaten, some Christians love that, right? Some Christian traditions are full of that. And to listen to some Christians leaving church is like standing outside of a gym and listening to people leaving a gym after they've been trained by some really over-the-top, aggressive ex-military Polish trainer or something, you know? And they walk out of the building going, oh, that's painful, but I needed that. That's not a good phrase for church, all right? But I've literally seen Christians walk out of church and they think that's a positive. And I'm thinking that's a disaster. That's not representing Jesus or the gospel at all well. That feeling of I've just been whipped and beaten, but I probably deserve it. But if they come out saying, wow, Jesus is awesome. The sermons pointed them ultimately to him or to God's grace or whatever, was appropriate in the text they were preaching. Ultimately, it's about him, not about me. If the sermon is finishing with people saying, oh, I so want to worship him, I so want to live for him, I'm so going to trust him, then I think that preaching is probably a success. If they're coming out thinking, I do need to try harder, I do need to stop doing that. It might be true, but are they going to be successful at fixing themselves? No, because that's not Christianity. It's not the way it works. Okay, so evaluate the preaching as part of this, okay? But it's not simply about the preaching. It's some of those more incidental things that I think are worth mentioning, because if we get those wrong and people end up walking away, what a shame. That's such a sad thing that we just didn't bother to think about it. So evaluate, ask others what they've noticed. There'll be people in your church that know things that they've never said. And you asking people in your church raises the expectation that we might be making some changes. And if you're open to them pointing out, well, actually, I really feel like those refreshments are not very good. Or here's one, just to throw one last idea at you. Why do we pass the offering? That feels really awkward if a guest is here. We decided when we started our church, we will never pass an offering, a collection, because we don't want money from non-Christians. Now, how do people in the church give? Well, they'll give by bank transfer anyway. We did actually have a collection thing. We thought it'd be funny to get a little treasure chest, like a pirate's treasure chest, and put a little slot in the top, and then hide it so that only the insiders knew where it was. So if you want to give by cash, you can kind of go around the back and drop it in, but guests wouldn't know. And then we ordered it. First thing we ever bought as a church. Didn't have dimensions. It was massive. We got this massive treasure chest that we're trying to keep secret. It was a bit of a laugh for us, but that's shifted. We don't even bother with that anymore because nobody gives cash in our culture. They may in yours, but why pass the offering? It's so traditional. In fact, the church I grew up in, the denomination I grew up in, because I could think of about 50 churches in Italy and England, same denomination, I thought it was part of communion. Bread, wine, collection. That's a bit weird, if now I come to think about it. And so I'm far happier being in a church where I know if my neighbor comes to church, they're not going to be asked for money. Because it's awkward, isn't it? When the guest is there and the offering starts going around, I didn't bring my, how much do I give? What, it's just like, a little bit or a lot? Oh, why bother? We don't need their money. We want to give them Jesus. We don't want to take their cash.